Welcome to episode 7 of the Hail Married podcast. I'm A. Toves, and I'm joined by my husband, the Toves. It's our 7th episode, and the Roadrunners reached their 7th win. We're going to make some hot takes on our win over North Texas, as well as throw some Hail Mary shots downfield for our listeners to love or hate. A November to remember was the motto for UTSA this month, and they achieved it. 3 games and 3 wins, capping off a successful month and year with a beatdown of interstate rival North Texas, 49-17. On senior night, the Roadrunners were out to avenge last year's painful loss, and avenge it they did. While the offense was forced to punt on their first drive, they started the game with more energy than they have in the last several. A 53-yard field goal attempt on their second drive was just short of the goal. But the offense didn't have to wait long before they were back on the field, thanks to a well-timed interception by Rashad Wisdom. This time, the Roadrunners would march down the field and score on a 19-yard run by Frank Harris. The Roadrunners never looked back, holding the lead the rest of the game. They would add 3 more touchdowns in the second quarter, an 8-yard pass to Josh Cephas, a 65-yard breakout run by Sincere McCormick, and a 15-yard pass to DeCorian Clark on the drive following an interception by Clarence Hicks to take a commanding 28-7 lead at halftime. In the second half, the Runners extended their lead, adding 3 rushing touchdowns, a 4-yard rush from Brendan Brady, a 7-yard run from Sincere McCormick, and a 9-yard rush from BJ Daniels. Overall, the Mean Green struggled to get anything going offensively, playing both quarterbacks and trying to feed their leading rusher and wide receiver, but they just couldn't manage to score more than 17 points against a superior Roadrunner defense. The Roadrunners ended senior night with a number of records. They achieved a school record 624 yards of offense, which included a record 443 yards of rushing offense. Sincere McCormick broke his own single-game record with 251 yards on 23 carries, and with his 4th interception of the season, Rashad Wisdom tied the single-season interception record. Over the year, Traylor has made the analogy that each week of the season is like a chapter of a book. While we still don't know if there will be a Chapter 12 or an epilogue to the season, we can say Chapter 11 gave us an exciting ending and left us looking forward to the sequel.
What a November to remember. I'm going to throw some stats at you because I did kind of retweet. I think it was actually Stephen Whitaker who had taken the video, but it was really Javi who tweeted it. And that's this. In the 2 home games in November, UNT and UTEP, they outscored both 101-38. They outgained them 12-24 to 647. And they had 4 takeaways to 0 that they turned over. So there was dominance, but again, you look at just November as a whole and you add in that Southern Miss, you're talking about outscoring them 124-58. Mm-hmm. You're talking about outgaining 1528 to 994. And you're talking about having a total of creating 5 turnovers and only turning the ball over once. I mean, this is a team that last year seemed to couldn't create turnovers. Mm-hmm. Couldn't stop from turning the ball over. I get that they were younger, but still there was, it just seemed like they were error prone. And right. This year they cleaned it up, and here they are marching at the very end of the year, which we knew that they would probably be able to, hold up well, especially with the fact that they got that time off against Rice. Mm-hmm. But I think that what was really huge here is the fact that, again, they're not turning the ball over, and they're playing great defense. I mean, those are a good recipe for the end of the year, and it really helps. And that offense, even though it had sputtered at times and struggled, it made November just, again, memorable. I mean, it was great.
It's been a really long time since we had a November like this. I mean, really the closest was 2013. That was the same year that we went undefeated in November. We also had 7 wins, and we had that very satisfying win against North Texas at the end of the year. So lots of things to compare to 2013. I think somebody had tweeted out like we should party like it's 2013. But yeah, definitely a November to remember.
I mean, the 2013 team is kind of almost lauded as probably one of the best, if not the best, in UTSA history. I think this team, this 2020 version, has to either overtake them or at least be tied with them in terms of being the top UTSA football team of all time, because This team is just so talented.
Mhm.
They do have a lot of talent, in a lot of areas, more abundant in some areas than others. But it's the way they play together and the way they just seem to rally around each other, especially around their coach.
Mhm.
That it just makes a whole difference.
Right.
I think we've lauded Trailer this entire year, but I just think that I know everybody's kind of pining for him to get like the Conference USA Coach of the Year, National Coach of the Year.
Mhm.
Honestly, I don't care because I think we know for one thing for sure, we've got the coach that I think we need. We've said it
Right.
before in our podcast, and I think this just really cements it, especially seeing how he's handled not only all the COVID and everything going on, but let's go back just a couple of weeks ago where Jess Lepp takes over as defensive coordinator.
Right.
One of his coordinators is out. Like, as if he hadn't been thrown enough obstacles,
Right.
he's able to turn this around. So I just
Opportunity versus instead of adversity, right? Is that what you
right.
keep saying?
It's exactly. So if we get to the game, then let's go over the defense really quickly. I think while they weren't so spectacular, I think people were looking at some, saying that they played well, but
Mhm.
it wasn't like the most spectacular game. I kept telling you during the game, it's like they're just making North Texas work hard,
Right.
and for quick, explosive teams like North Texas, it gets frustrating if you're trying to make them march down the field instead of giving that opportunity to hit that quick strike for a touchdown.
Mhm.
They got the quick strike on just what looked like just a bad defense. Like we just
Right.
broke down in that play. But I thought that we just played smart on defense again, making them work hard, and in doing so, frustrating them so much that it seemed like they were beginning to press on plays,
Mhm.
and it just really kind of played into the hands of UTSA, especially the defensive line. Defensive line was wrecking havoc once again. I mean, you
Right.
only got 3 guys to their 5, and we were still wrecking havoc. We were still sending pressure. Lep did a really good job of, again, kind of, he's really, I think, done well in terms of getting into the defensive coordinator position.
Mhm.
Um, but I thought that, he called a good game and put these guys in the right position to succeed.
Yeah, he definitely seemed to be more confident at his play calling. I mean, one of the things that they talked about was that, they were definitely going to have to play fast because North Texas likes to have up tempo. And it seemed like there were a couple of times in previous 2 games where, it was taking them a while to get those play calls on the defense. So it was nice to see that they didn't struggle with that because that could have been really the difference in this game.
And that frustrated you so much earlier in the year
It did.
because when because when we would be talking about the defense or watching the defense on the field, you'd start getting frustrated whether we were in the dome watching them or we're on TV and we're watching them. You'd keep looking over at me like, why are they still looking on the side of the field? Like
Right.
they're about to, whoever insert opponent is about to snap the ball and we're still looking at the side of the field. So,
Mhm.
you know, I think you're right. I think there was they did a great job of preparing and making sure that they got those plays in order to match North Texas. And I didn't ever see a point where UTSA was really kind of stuck looking at the sideline or
Mhm.
caught off guard. It seemed like they were prepared. And, you know, I think that's a big testament to both Lep and Trailer is that I think they're really instilling into this team as to look, you prepare hard during the week and reap the benefits
Right.
on Saturdays.
Yeah, and they, definitely got to the quarterbacks in North Texas. I mean, not necessarily on tackles, but they got in their head. I mean, both of them just really struggled. Very low quarterback ratings. I don't know how you pronounce his name. Ayun had 9 of 19 for 115 yards, and Bean was 5 of 14 for 102 yards. I mean, it's probably one of their worst games of the season. So they obviously were really thrown off by our defense.
Yeah, I mean, it did at times. I felt like it felt like we had maybe a 12th player out there. I mean, we didn't, but
Mhm.
it felt like it because we were just kind of swarming to the ball. We were getting there. Again, we were giving up some plays in terms of but some chunk yards. But for the most part, we were holding them to the point where again, making it so hard for them to get down the field, and I think it just kind of led to that frustration because I think they really wanted to bombs away on this defense.
Mhm.
And, look what happened when they did. Rashad got an interception like you talked about earlier.
Right.
And we disguised coverages. That's where the clearance hits. Um, interception came through. I felt like, and maybe I'm wrong on here, but it felt like he thought that Clarence Hicks was going to blitz, and Clarence just dropped off, and he still tried to force that ball in there, beam, and it was trying to force it in there. So, I thought it was just solid team play by the defense. I get that it wasn't spectacular, but I think it was everything that the team needed to succeed on Saturday.
Yeah, and we saw better tackling. It wasn't great, but it was still better than it has been, and especially against last game. That was one of their focuses for the week, and again, they made improvements. They're going to have to continue to improve on those in the off season for next year, but.
Yeah, it didn't look like they were going through the trying to do the shoulder shots, which is what they were doing against Southern Miss, where they were trying to come in kind of hard with the shoulder shots, and it was like, guys, you got to just wrap up. Like, you wrap up, you be a little more sound in your technique, and the play's over. Yeah. Like, instead of allowing these bigger plays. So, and
you got to give a shout out to Ornstein, because he had some textbook tackling on that. Kickoff return.
I think it was Jared and Maldonado who said like, that's my kicker, and so I give him the whole Terrell Owens gif where Terrell Owens always was crying, saying like, that's my quarterback, like, that's our kicker. Like, that was great to see. But again, look, Ornstein is just handling kickoffs. He doesn't have to get in there, but he got in there. Yep. I mean, it just kind of tells you everything you know about the team. Exactly. Complimentary football. He stuck it in there, and you were the one that told me right after that, oh my gosh, they're all swarming Warrenstein. Like, everybody's like kind of on there. But again, look how tight this team is. That's big.
Yeah, no more of the Yanni having to high five himself on the sideline.
The saddest GIF. It's a great GIF, but it's sad. So we go to the offense. I mean, I don't really know how much more accolades you can talk about this team. Right. I mean, Sincere was Sincere. I keep telling you, he's like my Tim Duncan. He's just, he'll have his breakout games for the most part. You can count on him to get about 120, 130 rushing yards. He might get a touchdown or two in there, but he's going to be what's going to move this offense. So back in the sort of Spurs days, old Spurs days, it used to be about double teaming Tim and making sure somebody else essentially hit a shot. With this team, it seems like we've got the players out there, but I thought Frank just handled the offense really well. And it was good to see Frank really do well against, I would say, a better opponent. We've talked about, or at least I have, just kind of kicked him around for the fact that he's done really well against FCS and against the bottom teams like UTEP. I forget some of the other teams, but in Middle Tennessee, that's what I was thinking. Sorry. But it was good to see him against a UNT team who, even though they don't have a great defense, he still had to keep all of these defenders out of the box for Sincere. And it seemed like they went to more of an RPO where he was reading the safety and he was making the right calls. Right. He wasn't handing off to Sincere when he saw that safety come down. And he was throwing the ball out to the receivers. And I think that, more than anything, is what really helped some of these big Sincere runs. Sincere's, obviously, he's going to make some great plays, but it really helped that Frank was in his zone early with some of these sort of short to medium passes. Right. And he was hitting them. I mean, he was being accurate, which was a difference from Southern Miss, where those passes were there, but he was missing. And you could see Southern Miss just adjust and start stacking the box there.
I thought it was interesting what Traylor said in the post game, where they asked him why McCormick was still, out on the field so late into the fourth quarter. I don't remember what the score was at that point, but we had built up, pretty good lead. And his response was, well, he didn't want to be criticized or be on ESPN for, having given up this big lead. He wanted to win the game. So, I just thought that was kind of interesting that he was like, I left Sincere out there a little bit longer so I could, make sure we really shirt up this win.
But the funny part is that he had about 188 rushing yards at halftime. And I think he had maybe 60 to 70 yards in the second half. Really, the only person, honestly, that could stop Sincere yesterday was Jeff Traylor, because he kept him off the field. Right. I mean, sure, he did bench him essentially, earlier in the fourth quarter, but it seemed like North Texas started adjusting a little bit, but those passes were still out there. So, I mean, the team just kept moving, and I think that's big. And you saw a fresh Frank, be able to at least run the ball. He's not coming off some sort of injury. So I think it was good for him to also finish the season because,
Yeah.
I just felt like he needed that.
Mm-hmm.
And his offensive line kept him clean. There was a little bit of pressure early on, but the line, I think, did a great job, not only for Frank, but also for Sincere.
Right.
So it was big. I thought it was just the offense. I mean, you see the numbers. You see BJ Daniels come in, score, which was great because he's a senior. You saw Kadari Johnson break that late that late run. I was telling you, I hope they don't try to kneel it here because it's gonna get it below 600 yards again. Kind of like we had the problem against UTEP.
Right.
It seemed a little selfish for me to be asking for that, but he broke off a big run, and at that point you're like, all right, great, we're not going to worry about it. We can kneel it, and they're not going to get on Josh Adkins for kneeling too far away from them and losing too many yards.
Yeah, and it was good, particularly to see him have a good play because he really hasn't been on the field, and we just saw on Twitter that he got a scholarship this year, so nice way to kind of end the season for him.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I just think it was really good to see how this team built towards the very end, and really was able to, I'd say, start a little rough. I mean, that Texas State game, when we look back at it, they did kind of just fall apart. They did get tired.
Right.
But to go from that and us thinking, well, maybe this defense isn't going to be very good, and this offense is going to have to put up
50 points.
Yeah, 30. Well, Traylor kept saying
30.
Over 30 points a game to win. I don't think, you look back at these, you see that they don't really have to put up those more than 30 points, but it tells you just how much they improved. That deficit between in the games proved to be just, here's these guys finally got into a good comfort spot, and they started learning and they started applying, and look what it got us to. Yep. So it was a nice crescendo at the very end of the year.
Well, it was good to see Josh Adkins get some more playing time, but I got to tell you, I got a little nervous there at the end when it looked like, I forget who was running, but, where you typically see a run and Frank hands it off to Sincere or Brady or whoever, and he kind of steps back. Josh, on the other hand, hands off the ball, and then he runs forward and starts blocking for the runner, which was great, except I'm thinking, oh my gosh, he's going to get hurt again. Please don't hit him.
Which is funny, right? Because we've now gone from, oh my gosh, Frank is going to get hurt, to now just getting worried that Josh is going to get hurt. So no, I think that's just team ball from there. I think that's what it is. And I get the whole worry, but it's just fun to see these guys just have a smile on their face and really look how hard they've worked all season,
right?
And to have it, culminate in this and have little moments like what you're talking about,
yeah.
Or either Ornstein, getting that big tackle, Adkins going out and doing some blocking, or just having the defense. Just Rashad went out, and we thought, well, there's a problem, and they started attacking us right away. Yet, I believe it was Savion, maybe it was Kalechi that came in for him. I think it was Savion that came in, and it didn't seem like they really missed too much of a beat.
Right. Well, after last year and having sat through that very, very painful game in Denton, it was really good to see such an exciting win this year. See the tables turned this year.
It was. And real quick shout out though to the Bad Birds, because we were actually right next to them against North
Texas game.
We had no clue of who they were, but we learned later what they were going to become. And they sat through it too. They were cheering the team on hard. At that point, I had already given up and said, do we fire Frank Wilson after this? That's really what my question was. It wasn't like, are we going to ever be able to show our faces in Denton? But I think it's going to be interesting the next couple of years.
Absolutely. Let's talk about what we learned from the game.
Yeah, and I don't know if there's anything new. But for me, one of the first things was establishment of a branded culture has meant the world to this team. It's hard to ignore those single-digit players on the field. Usually when we're talking about who's making plays, who's the one, scoring, who is, making the interceptions, you just see single-digit players. And I think it's really proven big for Traylor to have come in with this culture and said, these are the guys that are going to be essentially the pillars of this team. They exemplify my brand, and that's why I want to make sure that it's essentially marketed. And, I think he's always coy in his, in most of his interviews about who's going to play, where they're going to play.
Mhm.
But I think what he's also done is just made it so much easier for a target to be on these, for opponents to put a target on these, single digit players.
Right.
Yet we still have other playmakers elsewhere. It doesn't mean that nobody else is tough or, doesn't
Right.
exemplify these, these attributes. But it says a lot about the fact that even though you're going to try to stop him, you just can't stop him.
Mhm.
Hashtag sincere McCormick, right?
Right.
But I thought there was two key quotes, even for this culture that he's brought. He was big and he said it before, and he's trumpeted it more now because of the seniors, and I think you kind of caught on to it as well, but it's that big, I didn't choose them, they chose me.
Right.
Everybody could have transferred. There could have been a mass transfers. They could have just been, UTSA doesn't have the facilities. UTSA isn't this team. I mean, BJ Daniels was on the transfer portal.
Right.
He never transferred. I don't know, obviously if he was talked to by the coaches or, if they said anything to him. But I mean, he ended up staying, and there's nobody else that left. And I think there's enough talent on this team to show that they could have gone elsewhere. They could have gone right up 35 to Texas State and helped out Spavital up there and made Texas State a stronger team, but they didn't. They stayed at UTSA. But I think most of all, and I think the reason why everybody wants or chose Traylor is a quote he had, I think it was earlier this week in an interview, when he said, when you show a kid you love them, they'll run through a brick wall for you. I think it just completely symbolizes the triangle toughness culture.
Mm-hmm.
We've seen it. We've talked about it in the podcast before, how much he loves his players. It's about those guys. It's a player's game. It's this. I'm going to say this. He is the player's biggest fan.
Right.
Forget their parents. You see Mama Wisdom out there, and she's trumpeting all the Judson players, her own son.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think there's a bigger fan of Rashad than Jeff Traylor.
Mm-hmm.
And that's saying something. And again, he didn't recruit Rashad, yet he probably sat down with him at some point and talked to him. And we know he did when, obviously he had the problems with the tackling, but at some point he talked with him and said, here's why you're my guy.
Yeah.
And I'm just using his words too. My guy, my dudes. There's just so much outpouring of love for his players. And I think that that's just one of the smallest things, yet it speaks so much in terms of how successful they've been this year.
Yeah. If you look back at this team, the players that we had, and, in some cases in 2018 and, definitely last year in 2019, you have almost all the same guys on the field. Yes, you can argue, okay, well, they have another year of experience behind them, but they're the same kids, and we have the same facilities. We have the same, recruiting challenges at this point. We're still selling, this promise of the race facility. Now, at least it's being built, but you're still, selling a future, not, your current situation. And really the difference has come down to coaching, play calling, and culture. And, for those that think that maybe things would have been different with the other coach if, they had one more year with these kids, I don't think that would have been the situation, because the culture wasn't the same. The play calling wasn't the same. And just the interaction between the coaches and the kids was not the same.
No. And I think as much as, even if the coaching was near the same on the field, I would say it's that off the field sort of love for each other and just expressing to them how much they really cared. That whole us against the world last year just didn't work out. It was sort of, it was just not there. It wasn't what it should have been. And it didn't lead to anything. It just led to another, I should say it did lead to something. It led to another losing record is what it did. But there was no passion. You see these guys play and they're excited to get back on the field on Saturdays. And it's really just to see, I think, Traylor smiling at them.
Yeah.
Or pumping them up, or, pumping them up, or I would say propping them up.
Yeah. And a lot of the assistant coaches too. You see the interaction between these assistant coaches, and the players, on Twitter, again, at the beginning of the season between them and the fan base. It's just definitely a different feel and a different culture that's been set up.
And we've said, and it's been said many times by us and by others, but due to all the obstacles this year, it shouldn't have happened.
Right.
Like there should have been challenges. But like you brought up last week, coaching does matter because of the fact that you see where the better coaches have been able to take on these obstacles and succeed.
Right. Rise to the occasion.
Yeah.
It was kind of interesting because someone had retweeted Don Harris's tweet from last year. And said, this tweet didn't age well, where, Don Harris was talking about how, the university had made a mistake firing Frank Wilson, and that, really the problems with the university were the facilities and the budget. And, that whoever came in was going to have the same challenges and was ultimately not going to be successful. And it's just interesting to see that right now because, obviously he was very wrong. I disagreed with the tweet at the time. Facilities and a budget don't make a coach or team successful. If that was the case, every Power 5 school would have a winning record because almost every single Power 5 school has great facilities and they've got a much bigger budget than UTSA, but they don't all have winning records.
Nor do they have Traylor.
Or someone like Traylor.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I mean, it was essentially Wilson throwing a tantrum, telling his buddy afterwards, yeah, I just got fired from my job. This place sucks. And his buddy then standing up for him and saying, nobody's going to be able to do well here because of this. Mm-hmm. Now, I think the counter argument right now would be, well, it's just one season. But I think there's a difference in what you see and what you're seeing on the field in terms of just game management, team management. I think just most importantly again, like you said, you're selling something, a future. And, he's been prepping up, I said Traylor's been propping up this race facility. He didn't have to prop it up. But I think what's key in that is that he's invested here for a while because he's talked about putting in the triangle toughness somewhere in the race facility and really keeping that to that brand and saying this is what UTSA should be about. You never got that, I would say, from Coker or from Wilson, but definitely from Wilson. I think, again, throwing that tantrum on the way out and Don Harris coming in and saying this, you just kind of want to say, Don, Traylor still can't shower on facilities, but he's 7-4. He's 7-4.
But look what he did this year.
Yeah. And it's the same conference schedule. So you can't say there's difference in terms of too big of a difference in terms of schedule. They're still playing the same conference opponents. And yet you see the difference in terms of, those results.
Absolutely.
So, I mean, I think there's still clearly, that's the other thing that we just need to want to say is that's what we learned is there's still some bitter feelings between towards Frank Wilson, but it's from the players because there was a lot of players yesterday and have been coming out that have been saying either you want to play for a coach that loves you want to play for, someone that's really going to develop you.
Right.
But then I thought the one that was big was Frank Harris essentially commenting to Lisa Campos and saying, thank you, Dr. Campos, for giving us Traylor. I mean, here's the quarterback saying that. Here's the guy that probably could have derailed everything by just saying, you know what, I'm out. I've had injury-filled seasons. Well, the guy that
he got benched this year. I mean, he got benched for a little while at one point. So, you could say that he had a right to be, kind of upset or at odds with Traylor at some point. But to have him come back and have that kind of endorsement, it just says everything.
Yeah. And I mean, I just can't say enough about Frank. Like that I think told you everything you needed to know about what this year was about. They needed Traylor just as much as I think Traylor needed these kids. So.
Yep. So I guess my last question for you really is, how does the uncertainty with the conference championship game affect the bowl games this year? I mean, we are sitting at the end of our regular season and we really don't know, first of all, who's going to be in that conference championship. And, we're just a couple of weeks away.
I mean, I think the percentages are low for us to be in the championship game. I think that's more of a dream. I think making sure, or at least crossing our fingers now, that more bowl games aren't canceled because of COVID. With the rates rising, with other things happening around, you're seeing more and more schools having issues. Which, by the way, we knew was going to happen. We've been waiting for winter where people had said before those rates are going to go up.
Right.
This is what's going to start happening. And yet teams still waited towards the end till, you had Big Ten wait till the end of October essentially to start their season. Pac-12 did the same thing. They waited long, quite a bit to get in there. So, I mean, I guess this is where we lose something with not having somebody that's over all the conferences, because it's not like somebody can come back and tell Conference USA, you guys need to make a decision. But it also speaks poorly of Conference USA that they haven't been able to come out and say, oh, look, games are being canceled. We're going to need to step in and make these adjustments to make sure that there's a clear cut answer.
Right.
Because to your point, there's going to be this sort of short gap between potentially the first bowl game and Conference USA championship.
I mean, honestly, the Frisco Bowl, which is the one that we've been talked about the most in terms of, UTSA going to a bowl, is the 19th, and the conference championship game is the 18th. So if you make that conference championship game, you can't be in the Frisco Bowl. But right now, the way it looks in the West, it's going to come down to the UAB Rice game on December 12th. So if UAB wins, they're in. If they lose, we're in. So if we're looking at the Frisco Bowl, are they really going to wait until December 12th to get a commitment from UTSA to say, yes, you're going to play the following week? Or no? Because what happens if it's a no? You have to have a backup team. And I don't know that that's going to be a really good situation for the Frisco Bowl. So if we have to say no to them because we're trying to figure out what's going on with the Conference USA Championship, does that mean that we then lose out, on an opportunity to go to a bowl because we don't necessarily know who else is going to be willing to pick us? I mean, looking at everything now, it seems like what Conference USA probably should have done was, after UTSA won, since we were the only game playing last Saturday, they should have then looked at the schedule and said, what games need to happen to determine the championship? Rice doesn't need to play Marshall. I mean, I guess if Marshall loses to Rice or FIU, which are their next two games, sure, that could throw the East into some confusion. But right now, they're very unlikely to lose either one of those games.
If Marshall lost to either two of those teams, they would have deserved to be in the championship anyway. Considering, I mean, they're the best team in Conference USA. We know that whoever from the West is crowned is going to have to go to Huntington and probably get beat up by Marshall. So,
right.
Yeah, I mean, I'm with you. I think it was a great idea from you.
You should have just said, look, Rice doesn't need to play Marshall. They need to play UAB. UAB is not playing anybody next week.
Right.
Move the game up a week. We could have figured out what's going on in the 5th, and then it wouldn't have been such a rush to figure out the bowls. But, that's just my take.
I mean, it just seems, you're right. What it does is kind of put everything in jeopardy. And it seems also like the bowls are just being inflexible. Like, I get that they've been set for certain dates, but I think they also have to realize times are changing. So are you going to change too? If everybody's going to continue being inflexible, then I think you're just going to create a bigger mess than you really could have done. I think there's, again, had there been somebody that was over all these conferences, a president, you could figure some of this out. But it just seems like, because every conference is out for their best interest and they don't even know what they're doing. I mean, Conference USA, again, like you said, they could have stepped in, did something, they didn't do anything. Because of all this happening, now there seems to be all this just so much uncertainty. So why create all that? You could be prepared ahead of time. But I guess preparation is not something that Conference USA or other conferences have been, I think, done well at. So,
All right. So who do you have as your offensive player of the game?
Well, for my bootleg honorable mention, I'm going to start out with the offensive line. I thought that they played well. In particular, though, my boy Maka came through again. You know, you had Dion Novell from North Texas, who was touted as his big time, defensive tackle. He's going to cause havoc. And Maka, for the most part, I think went one on one with him. He did get some help from Kevin Davis at times, but essentially neutralized that threat.
Right.
Therein, just essentially creating room for Sincere to operate, giving Frank time. Frank, honestly, aside from I think a couple of pressures, for the most part, had a clean pocket, was able to sit back there. He still made some quicker throws, but he had the time to do all that. He didn't have to worry about anybody coming up. And really, it's the biggest thing is coming up right at the middle. So, I propped up Maka since our first episode, but I think it's big that you have a guy who essentially is going to be here for next year, hopefully, unless he decides to do something else, but who is anchoring your line at center.
Right.
It means a lot for the offensive players. So with that, I would say the players, I'm going to go co-players of the game.
All right.
I'm going Sincere, obvious reasons. Guy had just a monster game.
Right.
Again, only person that stopped him was Jeff Traylor by just keeping him on the sideline.
He overtook Breece Hall again. He's back to being the number one running back in terms of yards. So.
Yeah. Again, how much more can you say about the kid? Like the fact that Frank Wilson was able to, convince him to come here to UTSA, and he's turned out to be the best running back here in Conference USA. I'm not going to get into the other conferences, but he's our running back. It's almost like you want to get the Terrell Owens emotional again after you talk about Ornstein. That's my kicker. That's my running back right here. But I have to really call out Frank Harris as my other co-offensive player of the game. And the reason, again, I kind of outlined before, his command of the offense early in the game was big. And I think it really helped open up running lanes for Sincere, but also helped him. And I think what's big is you saw much more progression. It seemed like he had more of those RPOs going on. So it felt like he had a better command of the offense and he felt so much more comfortable. He's in the Alamo Dome, so I think he just plays well at home. But I think that's just this next step is going on the road, recognizing some of this, and being able to operate the offense. Because I think if he's playing well in terms of, when the offense plays well, it's usually because Frank is operating well behind the driver's side of the car. So
yeah, and I think they had much better play calling this game to set Frank up for success. I think it threw him off a little bit last time when they tried to throw those deep balls right at the beginning of the game, and he wasn't successful connecting. And so you didn't really see a lot of that this game. You saw a lot more of the short passes that Frank's much more comfortable with. And so I think, coming out with those types of plays in the beginning gave him that confidence. And, all in all, he went 19 for 24 for 144 yards passing. He had 2 passing touchdowns, 113 yards rushing on 6 carries, and 1 rushing touchdown for him. So,
I'll say this about him.
A great game for him.
Yeah, he's not going to force the ball very often. He's not a quarterback that's going to do that. So to see him again have the success, and it was warranted. He's did a great job. So hopefully he continues to build on that, and hopefully he has another game to be able to do that.
All right. What about your defensive player of the game?
For the bootleg honorable mentions, I'm going to give one to Clarence Hicks, not just because of the interception, but it felt like he played a really good game. I thought the defense in general was just playing really well. So, but that defensive line has it's done so well throughout the season. Again, this game, they played just wonderfully. I thought Christian Clayton had his moments. Brandon Matterson had his moments. Big Country was in there. I just think overall they have just done great this season. But my player of the game is going to be, I'd say for the second week in a row, is Trevor Harmonson. He has just been playing incredibly well, especially in the middle linebacker position. I think he led the team in tackles. But having him really step up and really come up the way he has been crucial. So.
Yep, he had 9 tackles and 2 quarterback hurries.
Yeah, the guy was he was just all over the place. And again, good to see him just having some success.
Definitely. All right, before we go, I got to talk about my Iowa State Cyclones.
Finally.
Had a huge win over UT this week with the trip to a Big 12 championship on the line. I realize there's probably several UT fans listening right now, but I'm from Iowa. I grew up a Cyclone fan, and I've watched them over the years in so many games where they controlled their own destiny, just play miserably or make mistakes. And I was just so thrilled to see them come from behind and win this time. It was an ugly win, but it was a win.
I thought they played well in terms of doing what they needed to win the game. I thought they shot themselves in the foot quite a bit of times, but very similar to UTSA, their defense made stops when they needed to. They kept UT from getting in the end zone. They held them to plenty of field goals. And, at the very end, it still looked quite ominous because they were trying a 57-yard field goal, or at least UT was trying the 57-yard field goal.
Right.
I didn't think Dicker had enough of a leg to get it to 57 yards. He had plenty of leg. He could have gone from further out. It just went wide left.
Right.
Or it just kind of drifted left, I should say. It didn't really go too wide left. But, it was great it was a great game.
Yeah. And, kudos to Sam Elliger. He tried to get it done all by himself. I mean, that guy was out there rushing more than he typically does. He had a good game, but, one of the things that Traylor says all the time, you got to have team football, and Matt Campbell says the same thing. It's a team game. You can't have one man trying, to win the game by himself. So you got to give him kudos for really trying to put that effort out there. But at the end of the day, the Cyclones played team football, and that was the difference maker. The thing that I love, though, at the end of the game was Breece Hall's quote, where he said the game was 5-star culture versus 5-star players. I mean, again, I love the parallels at times between Iowa State and Matt Campbell's culture and UTSA and Jeff Traylor's culture. But, I think that quote really will resonate with the UTSA fans because, Iowa State, they don't have any 5-star players. But one of the things that Matt Campbell's really been able to do with that team is to take those recruits that are 3- and 4-star recruits and get them to play like 5-star recruits. He really knows how to build these guys up, and he's installed a culture at Iowa State and has really been able to reap, the rewards of that culture. And, again, much like we talked about Traylor, Matt Campbell is that coach that players want to play hard for. So it was really good to see them win. Next up for Iowa State, they've got a home game against West Virginia, and then every indication is that they'll be in the Big 12 championship.
I mean, it sounds familiar, right? Again, here's those parallels you're talking about. Yep. Potentially, UTSA has that opportunity to get into the Conference USA championship. Here are two good coaches who've brought in really good cultures. Again, I would say 5-star cultures, and they're taking on teams. Here we took on BYU earlier in the year, and we hung with them more than we thought we would.
Yep.
So the parallels are there, and hopefully if we can have the same success. And that was one of the things we did talk to Traylor about earlier in the signing day event. We told him about how much we liked Matt Campbell, and if he can be anything like what Matt Campbell's at Iowa State here at UTSA, I don't think there would be any problem from any UTSA fan saying that they're fine with having an Iowa State type success at the Conference USA level.
Absolutely. All right. Well, thanks again for joining us for the Hail Mary podcast. I'm Atos.
And I'm the Toves.
We are not sure when we're going to be back to review our next game, but we will be back soon with the second part of our special episode looking back at 10 years of UTSA football. So see you soon.
All right, guys. Birds up.